Well, good morning. Welcome to Discovery, whether you're in person or online. We're so glad you're here to worship with us. Go ahead and stand. We're going to start off in worship and just thanking God that we have joy and we can find goodness in Him. So go ahead and stand and worship with us. Every battle, every heartbreak, every circumstance, I believe that you are my fortress, you are my portion, you are my hiding place. I believe you are the way, the truth,
Yeah, gotta aim for the top like, hold up. Yeah, I can never doubt myself, I know better. All of you critics be acting like you know better. Blowing the smoke, but I know when the dust settles that I'm in my element. It's evident that there's levels to the game. All of those dark nights I got then, breaking my back to make it out, got me feeling like rain. I ain't never need your help, I know you wishing me well. A penny for your thoughts, but seeing no change. I snap for the sun like Diddy. The riches got a mad ass son, I'm like Billy. I ain't never switch up, whole team with me. Putting on for my city like OAGZ. Set the pace as long as you finish. Consumers find a way inside your business. Babble if they try to dabble in it, and they hate the fact that they may have to witness. You tryna aim for the top like this, and you're in your element with a fire like this, and they hoping you fall and they praying you miss, but it's all in the risk. I got you with the switch, you know. I'm in the zone. Give me the throne. One shot, that's all that you got. That's all that I know.
Well, hey guys, good morning. Welcome to Discovery. My name is Todd. I'm one of the pastors here, and I'm super glad to be with you. I'm glad you joined us. And can we just give Kate a round of applause for putting some hip hop into this service? Oh man. She asked me if that's what she should do, and I was like, oh yeah, for sure, if you can find something. She found a great song. So anyway, glad that she did that, and very proud of her and this church for some hip hop. Anyway, hey, this summer, we are super excited. We announced it last week that we were going to be hosting, for the first time in a long time, something called Discovery Kids Adventure Camp. And it is for kids who are going into kindergarten or going into fifth grade or anywhere in between. So like basically people going into elementary school this upcoming school year. And we are so excited to take these kids, back in time and hang out with some dinosaurs, and also dig up some dinosaur-sized ideas all about Jesus, and kind of help them have a great time while also getting to know Jesus a little bit more. So make sure to sign up for that. Out in our kids area, there are invitations that you can take to give out to your kids and your kids' friends and all that stuff. Make sure to get them signed up really, really soon. It will be the last week in July from 5 to 8, and then on that Sunday, we will culminate it all with a giant party here right after church, probably with a dunk tank and some food trucks and things like that. So we're really looking forward to it. It's going to be a great time. Make sure to sign up for that soon. Also, if you're new around here, you're just getting to know us a little bit, I just want to encourage you to make sure to head out to Start Here. That's why that sign says that. It's a great place to start, just to get to know some of our church and some of the things going on around here. If you're interested in digging in a little bit deeper, though, and getting to know us some more, and you want to understand what the heartbeat around Discovery is, and get to know our lead pastor and things like that, we have this thing called Base Camp. We do it about once a month, and it happens to be happening today. And so some of you have already signed up for that. You'll just head back to the public room once this service is over. Give us a few minutes as we kind of transition everything, and we will look forward to hanging out with you there. And if you didn't sign up, it's totally fine. You can still stay. But again, it's a chance for us to kind of huddle up before we kind of commit to a journey together. So anybody's welcome to come. We'd love to see you there at Base Camp. We'll have free pizza and salad and childcare as well. So love to see you at that thing. Speaking of all of that, for those of you who call Discovery home, and this is your church, we want to let you know that on May the 4th, we're going to be having a gathering here, and our lead team is going to be here, and we just want to kind of tell you a little bit more about kind of the state of the church. It's sort of an opportunity for us to tell you some of the stuff going on behind the scenes and kind of set vision for the future. And so we'd love for you to come hang out with us that day and just hear from our lead team and get to know them a little bit more and their heartbeat behind everything going on here at Discovery. That's May the 4th, which not only will be a big day here at the church, it's a big holiday, right? May the 4th be with you kind of thing. So we're really excited for that day. Speaking of which, there's this viral video that was going around where this kid about my age, he gave his parents, his super religious parents, a portrait for Christmas. Check this video out.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh. This is going to be such the painter.
Wow.
Holy cow.
I've never even seen that one.
Yeah, it's pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah. So cool looking. Look at that cat.
That is so neat.
Not neat.
Love you guys.
It's funny. It's a little mold.
I know, right? I guess they just add the add the detail.
Perfect. No.
Thank you, love you, man.
Thank you. I love you so much. Why are you smiling?
Jordan helped me pick it up.
Did he?
Well, this message brought to you by the new Disney Plus show, Obi-Wan Kenobi, premiering next May. That family may not have realized for a while that was not Jesus, and they hung it up in their family room for a long period of time until this video went viral, and the kid had to finally tell his parents, hey, by the way, that's not actually Jesus. Would you, just for a moment, close your eyes. As you do, take a deep breath and bring into your mind's eye a picture of Jesus. This isn't a test, so be honest with what your first reaction is. Maybe it's a piece of art from history. Maybe it's a stained glass window, a framed picture that you saw frequently hanging in your church or home growing up. Or maybe it's just your own unique attempt to picture him as you've heard stories about him and you've heard what he's like. All right, keep that picture in mind, but go ahead and open your eyes. Many of us have been handed a portrait of Jesus, and sometimes it's hard to tell if it's real or if it's just a prank. And though we obviously don't have any pictures of Jesus, we do know that he was a Middle Eastern Jewish man who spent a good chunk of his childhood in Africa, blending in there. He had a dark complexion, he had shaggy, short hair. And if he spent any time apprenticing with his construction worker dad, he may have had calluses and windburned skin and very developed muscles. By the way, this is what most historians think that Jesus most likely looked like. It's pretty far off from the Obi-Wan Kenobi picture that some of us tend to think, but maybe the most egregious mistake we tend to make is in one detail that we oftentimes ignore, and one that picture gets wrong as well. As you were thinking about your picture of Jesus in your mind's eye, your first thought, your first instinct and impression, was he smiling? We might think of Jesus as being the wisest person who ever lived, or maybe the most forgiving or patient or kind or loving person. Maybe we even think of him as the smartest person who ever lived, but do you tend to think of Jesus as the happiest person who ever lived? And yet the author of Hebrews, whose whole first goal is to explain the very nature and character of who Jesus is, he starts by saying he's the perfect representation of God, his glory, and his character. And then he goes on to very quickly say that means that God has anointed him, pouring out the oil of joy on him more than anyone else. That means he's like Nickelodeon slimed with joy. It's pouring over his head, it's running through his beard, it's getting in his mouth, and it's drenching his clothes. And this same idea, bringing saturating joy in the same words, is repeated by Jesus himself in Luke 4 when he describes what his mission on this planet is. So it should be no surprise to any of us that when we look at his life and we trace through the stories about him, he is just constantly at a party. I love the way that one pastor said it. He said that Jesus is either on his way to a meal or at a meal or heading home from a meal. So if you're reading the Gospels doesn't make you hungry, then you're not reading it right. Another biographer, John, says the first time that Jesus revealed who he really was at a party. It was a wedding, and they ran out of wine, which was embarrassing. And so he takes these 6 25-gallon drums of water and he turns it into wine, the finest wine that they had ever tasted. Sommelier remarked that this is the best thing he's ever had. And John says that is the first time that Jesus revealed explicitly who he was and what he was really about. There's another biography that says that he was accused of being a drunkard and a glutton. Now, he wasn't necessarily either one of those things, but you don't get that reputation for nothing. Jesus himself said that parties were actually the best metaphor he knew to describe what it's like to be in God's presence for eternity. He was a magnet for people, so naturally parties developed around him all the time. But specifically, he was a magnet for broken people, rejected people, bad people, sinful people, people who had given up on fitting in and being good and climbing the social ladder. These people had no other reason to be around him other than they just genuinely liked his presence. Similarly, there was another unique group that flocked to Jesus, kids. One time it got so bad that his closest followers tried to keep the kids away, and Jesus said, don't you understand? These kids understand me more than most of you. And by the way, kids don't like being around grumpy people, cynical people, pessimistic people. Kids, they're attracted to wonder and smile and laughter, and apparently Jesus had more than enough of that to go around. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of the evidence that Jesus, who perfectly reveals the nature of God, was a party animal. He was a fun guy, the kind of person that lit up a room with infectious joy when he walked in. What if joy and happiness was just as important to Jesus' mission in the world as anything else? What if at the center of the universe, woven through the fabric of atoms, our reality is sustained not by an old, grumpy man who says, get off my lawn and straighten up, but instead, at the center of it is a being that is constantly on the verge of laughter and full of vitality? How would that change the way that we see the world, and how would that change us? I love the way that one Bible professor summed it up. He said, we shape our image of God, and that image of God shapes us. That is, we are wired to grow in the likeness of the things that we worship. So if you think the universe or God is cold and distant and dangerous and unforgiving, then you're gonna live a guarded, fearful life. But if you think the universe at its core is run by a generator of joy, you'll live with the expectation of cosmic jokes, of breathtaking wonder, and of a hopeful arc of history. So why do so few of us naturally think that God is the happiest being in the universe? Part of it, I think, is because so many of us have been told by well-meaning people that God isn't interested in your happiness, he's interested in your holiness. So many of us have been told there's a big difference between joy, which is lasting, and happiness, which is only temporary and fleeting. And I totally understand the distinction, and I think they're partially right. We'll talk about that in a second. But along the way, I think they stifle a legitimate desire within us. See, those people who insist that joy and holiness and happiness are so different, more often than not, were incredibly grumpy people themselves, weren't they? These cynical people, they're like, God wants you to be joyful, not happy. And they'll insist that they've got the joy, 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 joy down in their heart. And all of us are like, where? Because they're not letting it get anywhere near their face or their funny bones. It's no wonder so many people are looking elsewhere outside of the church to find happiness. The motto of our state is what? It's based on the foundational reason that this nation exists. Do you guys know what it is? Pursue your happiness. In our hearts, in the foundational structure of our nation that we live in, and in the economic DNA of our modern world, we are desperately longing to find happiness. This isn't a new impulse in logging, and it's certainly not foreign to the church. In fact, Christian philosophers, the kind of guys that would end up on the Mount Rushmore of Christian thinkers and theologians, they said the same thing. Augustine said, every person, whatsoever their condition, desires to be happy. Thomas Aquinas said, people are unable to not to wish to be happy. Blaise Pascal wrote, all people seek happiness. This is without exception. Notice that they didn't say the desire was wrong. It is a Christian desire, a natural desire, a holy desire to want happiness. Any way you look at it, though, our affluence, our interconnectedness, our careers, all of our pursuits for this happiness, they're all sending us trending in the wrong direction. As our standard of living grows, our happiness has been sinking, and everything I can see says it's been in collective decline for a very long time. One study on American happiness has been following along with this since 1972. The happiest level ever was just around when they started at 38% max. People were happy. But it's been on a downhill roller coaster ride since then, with a massive drop, as you might expect, in the last few years, down to 19%. 19% of us reporting that they're actually happy in life. Any way you look at it, though, numbers are not encouraging for a country that's built on trying to pursue happiness. Apparently, our current pursuits are not working very well. Today, we're going to kick off this series called Beats. We're back in chapter 9 of Core 52. If you don't know what that is, it's a collection of 52 essays that are meant to help you understand core biblical themes a little bit better and give you daily rhythms for connecting with God. If you're new here, we'd love to give you a copy of that book. Just head out to start here. And this week is actually one of the best chapters in the entire book so far as I've read, or at least it's one of my favorites. So this is a great time to pick that back up or pick it up for the first time right here in chapter 9. These next several weeks, we'll be focusing in on the book of Psalms. Psalms is a collection of 150 ancient poems and prayers and songs by multiple authors who are wrestling with an authentic attempt to understand and experience the presence of God in their lives. So if you've ever wondered how to pray or how to be fully honest with God or where God is in your suffering or how to thank God when things are going well, this is the book for you. That's why the tagline of this series is Songs That Keep You Moving. These songs help give us perseverance. They push us forward like on a runner's playlist. When you need a push for one more mile, you might throw on a song like this to try to convince them that they can push through their exhaustion. So, speaking of happiness, I wonder, do you have songs that make you move? Is there like one song, every time it comes on, whether it's at a wedding or at a party or whatever, you just have to dance? In a few weeks, we're gonna do a series called Against All Odds. We've settled on the name, and I'm really pushing for it to be a Phil Collins series. So, I mean, if you guys want to help me convince Matt of that, you can send him emails or whatever at mmahaffey@discoverypgh.com. We need some more Phil Collins at this church. So, Sam and I were kind of going through the best hits of Phil Collins, and this song came on, I don't think I've ever heard it before, called Easy Lover. Maybe you guys know it, and I couldn't help but dance to this thing. It was fantastic. So do any of you guys have any songs that you just can't help but dance to? Shout it out or put it in the chat. Anybody? Sweet Caroline. Oh, we got some Red Sox fans or something back there. Any other song you just can't help but dance to? What? Jailhouse Rock. All right. Some good old school stuff. Awesome. Anybody else? Time of My Life. Earth, Wind, and Fire? All right. Oh, apparently we should toss that on right now. Danny's going to dance. I like it. Okay, for those of you who answered, your homework this week is just to play that song and dance along to it and have some good times. For those of you who didn't answer, you need to find a song and dance to it. And then you need to take a video of yourself, post it online, and tag us in it, and we'll share the video. It's going to be great. I'm just kidding. You won't do that. So students in the room, get a video of your parents dancing this week, post it, and tag us in it, okay? Thank you. This morning and next week, we'll be focusing on the first two Psalms, which actually stand apart from the rest of the entire book. These two Psalms, Psalms 1 and 2, are like the thesis of the entire book. They set the tone and prepare us for the major themes that we would find throughout the next 148. So we're going to look at Psalm 1 today. This is how the entire book starts. By the way, this is also the basis for Matt's sleeve tattoo. So if you really want to impress him, make sure to pay close attention and really memorize this verse. It goes like this. It says, oh, the joys. By the way, some translations, including the one in Core 52, will say blessed. Blessed and joy and happiness, they're all interchangeable translations for the same word, okay? So I really like this version of it that says joy. To be blessed, though, is to be happy. So think about that anytime you read blessed in the Bible, you can replace that word with happy. It says, oh, the joys of those who do not follow the advice of the wicked or stand around with sinners or join in with mockers. But they delight, this is a different word this time, but it's a word that it's a synonym, but it has kind of a connotation of like pleasure, like a kind of a sensual word almost. So it's like a really beautiful but kind of passionate word. And then be prepared for a little bit of whiplash. It says, but they delight in the law of the Lord, meditating on it day and night. And I think the natural question here is, of course, how in the world can focusing on law or legal material make you pleasurable? Like, how do you get delight out of this? It sounds like you're saying you can find great joy by spending all day and all night reading the terms and conditions, which kind of feels like how long it would take to read some of those things. But then those people who meditate on those things, what are they like? It goes on to say, they're like trees planted along the riverbank, bearing fruit in each season. Their leaves never wither, and they prosper in all they do. See, the first word of this psalm, and thus the entire book of Psalms, is saying that the happiest being in the universe wants you to be happy too. And since many of us have been taught in the church that happiness is a dirty word, or at least a dangerous word, this is probably kind of strange. But it's so core to the mission of Psalms that it's reiterated in the last line of Psalm 2. It says, what joy for all who take refuge in him. And so the first line and the last line of the thesis of the entire book of Psalms emphasizes the same goal. God wants you to be happy. And yet, I'm sure many of you are sitting here thinking, well, it sure doesn't seem like it sometimes. I know for me, if you ever want to know just how unhappy you are, just kind of prepare for a week to figure out like how you're going to talk about happiness, because the more you think about how happy you are, the more you realize how irritable and annoyed and lame you can be from time to time. It'll become very clear to you if you're ever trying to talk about happiness, how little of it you have. It's not only, though, our religious baggage that makes this so unbelievable. It's also the dramatic increase in mental health issues in our world. More than ever, we're growing in both awareness and acceptance that chemical imbalances and medical complication can result in things like oppressive, consistent depression, anxiety, and other issues. And probably all of us know somebody who wrestles with this stuff at a deep level. And they've tried the carousel of medications and the parade of counselors. Some have found respite and solutions, but others, they just feel like they're stuck in a cycle trying to hit a moving target. Not to mention, we have a consistent onslaught of news and social media algorithms that thrive on negativity. And our brain's natural reactions actually help this, unfortunately. We automatically process negative information quickly. It takes about 3 seconds, but it takes us a full 14 seconds to process positive information. Our brains are like flypaper for negativity. They're like Teflon for positivity. See, when Sam gives me a compliment and I start to move on a lot of times, sometimes she just says, shut up. Just listen to that, let it digest. And that's a good practice anytime some good information comes your way. Anytime you experience wonder or a good joke or a moment of captivating love, take that moment, at least 14 seconds, and let it sink in. So on the one hand, it's easier to be cynical, but maybe on the other hand, your brain just wants to move on from negativity quickly. But it wants to take time for you to steep in positivity. Maybe that's why the author here tells us to meditate. That is to fix our attention for an extended period of time, probably a little bit longer than 14 seconds, maybe more like 14 minutes, soaking our brain in beautiful, good, lovely, wise, true things that only come from God. Maybe for every negative thing we're exposed to, we need to spend 5 times as much time meditating on something that grows our happiness. Now, it shouldn't be too much of a surprise, but it is really, really hard to measure and study happiness. But most researchers have kind of come up with this formula that says it's your circumstances plus your choices plus your genetics that all feed into your happiness. They all agree on the formula, but they don't all agree on the weight of each factor in the formula. See, you'll read about this a little bit more in Core 52, but their findings essentially say a large portion of our happiness comes from just winning the genetic lottery. Some of us are just naturally happier than other people. The second largest chunk, or maybe an equal large chunk, it's hard to tell, comes from how we choose to spend our time and our attention. Now, they disagree on how much each of those factors play a role in your happiness, but they all agree on one thing, that the smallest percentage, probably about 10% of our happiness, comes from what most of us expect to affect our happiness the most, our circumstances. So the well-meaning, sometimes grumpy people who are trying to get you to differentiate between your joy and your happiness, they're just trying to get you to stop expecting your circumstances to be the foundation of your happiness. See, if we use what we can control, our choices, to focus on what we can't control, we give our circumstances the majority rule in our happiness, even over our genetics. By the way, the genetic side, that's where medication comes into play. It plays a role as kind of like, medication can be like a ladder for you to kind of climb up, to get yourself on emotional, solid ground. It's just kind of a start, though, because as many of us have experienced, as we've tried to address these things in our lives, there's a big difference between being numb and being actually happy. Once we stabilize that, potentially with medication and counseling, we can begin to work on our choices and attention with the help of others. But the great news here is that 90% of our happiness is dependent on internal factors. And as research continues to grow, we're finding that our brains and all of those internal factors are far more pliable, flexible, and changeable than we could ever expect. The nerdy name for this is neuroplasticity. Maybe you've heard that word before. Our brains can change, so that means so can our baseline level of happiness. But that's not the end of the neurological good news. One more thing. While almost all of our different areas of our brain reach full development sometime in childhood, the part that's tied to your joy never loses its capacity to grow. Researchers call this your joy strength. And they say as it grows, it has a unique influence over all kinds of parts of your brain, including your basic desires, your basic drives, your pain, your immunity, and so much more. All that to say, the God of happiness, as unlikely as it might seem for some of us, has designed you to be able to cultivate your happiness. Sometime with the help of medication, a lot of times with the help of counseling, and even more so with his help, it is possible to grow your happiness maybe to a nearly unlimited extent. It'll take time, it'll be naturally easier or harder for some of us, but God has made you capable of being happier than you are now. And while there are biological obstacles, that means there's also biological opportunities. Can I make a quick criminal confession? This could get me arrested. I know it's being recorded and online, so we'll see. To preface this, I'll just say this. I am not a good driver. I'm probably what you would call a bad driver. I've come to accept this. It's not like I'm getting in accidents all the time. It's just that people in the car with me tend to not have a great experience. So, sorry, take that as you will. I've tried. It is what it is. And to couple that, from my house to Freedom Road, there's an over-under of about 1,000 stop signs. And sometimes it just gets a little tedious, right? You're looking ahead, you see nothing's coming, and I'll just sort of stop, but sometimes it's not a full stop necessarily, okay? So police officers, if you want to pay attention to me later on and arrest me, whatever. But, so that happens from time to time, okay? It's just a temptation. We're all ravaged by sin, and that's my sin, one of them at least. But one thing I notice, and this happens a lot, as I'm doing that from time to time, again, intersection's completely clear. No cars, no anybody. But you'll see a 50 to 100 yards down the road, you'll see this person, walking your dog. Have you seen these people? They walk their dogs in the neighborhood. So they'll be walking their dog, just going along like this. And then as I do this, rolling stop or whatever, they will do this. And I'll just look at them and be like, hi. But I think, man, I kind of take pity on those people when I see that moment because they're surrounded by a beautiful, beautiful creation of God's, right? And this is this must be a rare Pittsburgh good day of weather, right? So there's all these things to be grateful for. They've got this little beast on a rope that is in love with them. It's this mystical, magical experience that they're in the middle of. And yet all they can seem to do is focus their attention on some guy that is 100 yards away from them, not affecting their life or anybody else's life, and they just get mad at that person. And I wonder how much all of us do that from time to time. Surrounded by so much good in our lives, and yet we seem to break our attention away from everything that's good, to focus on everything that's wrong, even on things that have no real effect on our lives or many other people we know. This psalm gives our attention a place to start. It shows us how to start changing our broken attention span, and it's exactly where most of us would least expect it. As we read, it says that the joyful delight in the law of the Lord, meditating on it day and night. So how in the world can pouring through legal materials bring us joy? Law here is the Hebrew word Torah. It's a word for legal material. Even more specifically, it's the word for the first 5 books of the Old Testament, but it can also more generally be used in place of teaching or instruction. And it's even meant, in a sense, to point to the rest of the Psalms, that as we meditate on the Psalms, we will delight in God. So really, it's saying that any message from God is something that brings us delight. In other words, it says meditating on the instructions of God cultivates happiness. And so for many of us, and I'm with you, we think of God's law or instructions, the first thing we think of is the weird stuff that's in there. We can't wrap our minds around why couldn't they eat shellfish or pork? That seems pretty lame. The best parties I have involve pork, like a good roasted, smoked pork butt. Or what's the point of all of the ceremonial purity laws that are in the Bible? Other times when we think of God's law, we think of all the thou shalt nots, right? And it just feels so restrictive. But as we get distracted by the trees, oftentimes we miss the forest. While God's law includes a lot of weird stuff, it also gives them structure for consistent celebration, among many other things. From the very beginning, the Jewish law repeatedly mandated a day of rest, something unheard of in cultures around them. A day to sit and to celebrate. It was meant to be like Christmas morning every single week. It also structured their year around 3 7-day parties, 21 days of partying. The original Jewish people, They didn't throw like afternoon parties or one-day parties. 7 days of partying 3 times a year. In the midst of all the instructions around sacrifices in the Old Testament, which sounds so archaic to us sometimes, we miss what frequently happened to the meat after the sacrifices. A big family barbecue. In Deuteronomy 14, Moses prescribes that they budget 10% of their income above what they're already giving away generously to help people out. They say budget 10% so you can throw one massive party for your family every year. All of these special days and parties were meant to foster in them gratitude by enjoying what God had given them. Celebration has always been a key joy-cultivating practice for God's people from God's earliest instructions. He wants us to consistently take intentional time to take pleasure in all the good things of the world. There's a famous kind of classic book that's not too old by a guy named Richard Foster called The Celebration of the Disciplines. And it's a book about spiritual disciplines like fasting and prayer and how to do those things the right way. And his book culminates with this specific idea that celebration should be a key spiritual discipline or practice. In that chapter, he writes, celebration is central to all the spiritual disciplines because joy is the motor. It's the thing that keeps everything else going. Joy produces energy. Joy makes us strong. It is not something that falls on our heads. It's the result of consciously chosen ways of thinking and living. So when we're meditating on God's law, we're also reminding ourselves of everything worth celebrating and growing in gratitude and putting together a plan to take pleasure in it. So half the time God is mad at his people, it's explicitly for this reason: they're not partying enough. So here at Discovery, we don't ever want to be accused of that. So next Saturday, we were throwing a giant party here from 2 to 5. It's a birthday party, and really it's just an excuse for us to hang out with all of our favorite people, you people, and for you to bring, some friends or neighbors or some other people from the community so we get to know them as well. And we just have a great time celebrating and bringing more joy into our lives. We'll have live music, food trucks, kids' activities. Dented Keg will be here, a big inflatable obstacle course, all kinds of stuff like that. We would love for you to come and hang out with us just to have fun and bring a little bit more joy into the world. And another one of our neighborhood groups understood this as well. And they heard that, there's a lot of couples that are strained relationships right now in our area. And so they decided to put on a little event. It's kind of a date night. You don't have to be a couple, though. You can date yourself and come to this thing, too. It's a trivia night, and it's a wine and cheese night. It's called Sip and Savor. It's the idea that we're just going to have a good time taking in all of the good gifts that God has given us and having a good time together to bring more joy into relationships and into the world. If you want to be a part of that, you can sign up on our website. As one pastor once said, suffering is inevitable. It's going to happen. Joy is not. Pain is coming for you, but you have to go after joy. You have to choose to cultivate it. That's why God tried to teach them to consistently celebrate it, put it in their calendars. For some of us, the next step in fostering God-given happiness is to go to one of those parties or to throw one of your own. So half the time God was frustrated with his people is because they weren't partying enough. The other half of the time, though, God was frustrated because they were making terrible decisions and taking advantage of people. See, God's instructions, it sounds restrictive to us sometimes, but his instructions, they also include a lot of rules for things like how to care for immigrants, how to treat employees, how to honor marriages, how to make fair business dealings, and generally how to be a wise and good person that helps other people. See, while it has this reputation of being restrictive, the reality is that God's instructions are meant to be protective. A few weeks ago, this article was making the rounds. It was in the Washington Post. It was titled this: "Consent is not enough. We need a new sexual ethic." Turns out people say yes sometimes because they think they're supposed to, or because the other person has a strong influence of them, or they feel pressured. Or even sometimes they say yes, and in hindsight, they regret their decision. They weren't as comfortable with the situation as they thought. And this author, as she details all of these experiences, she concludes, but the outcome of a sexual ethic guided only by consent is a world in which young people are both liberated and miserable. The experience is often sad, unsettling, and even traumatic. And then in an effort to find a new ethical foundation, shockingly, the author ends up circling back to the ancient wisdom of the church. She uses the words of the Christian thinker Thomas Aquinas. She says maybe it should be, our sexual ethics should be focused on willing the good of the other. She says sex should be selfless. Not bad advice in general, by the way. That is the most intimate, emotional, personal act possible. Sorry, I said sex should be selfish. I meant selfless. Wow, I just caught myself. Selfless, just to be clear. The most emotional, intimate, personal act possible maybe should be kept within healthy boundaries that truly benefit the other person that's involved. Christian sexual ethics, God's instruction when it comes to the good gift he designed. It gets a lot of flack in our culture. People think of it as being restrictive or prudish or repressive. This is a completely non-Christian, secular platform saying that maybe God's instructions were closer to being right all along. Remember that Psalm 1 says, joy comes when we avoid doing what everybody else is doing. One of my favorite definitions of sin comes from the ancient Christian thinker Ignatius of Loyola, long before his namesake was a great Cinderella story in March Madness. He wrote this. He said, sin is unwillingness to trust that what God wants for me is only my deepest happiness. It's when we grow suspicious or resentful of God that we spiral into behaviors and lifestyle that accumulates all kinds of regret and consequences and disappointment. What if God's rules or laws or restrictions are actually the key to entering a growing trajectory of lasting happiness in our lives, happiness that develops exponentially through long-term commitments, growing wisdom, and willing the good of other people just as God has willed your good? For others of us, to cultivate happiness means finally doing the thing that we know we should do, or stop doing the thing we know we shouldn't be doing, and trusting that God's instructions are actually for our happiness. So, if we meditate on God's instructions, we'll learn 1, to structure our lives around celebration, 2, to protect ourselves from happiness-sucking mistakes, but most importantly, though, 3, sets our attention on the happiest being in the universe, and God's joy is infectious. Have you ever been around those people that just kind of bring the party wherever they go? They have this atmosphere of fun around them. I'm talking like Janie Mahaffey, Brittany Vakiner, Brian Grattan, these people that you just, if you're in their proximity, you're having a good time. For some of us, maybe the most important thing we can do is to schedule lunches with these people or be in their presence more often so we can just have some of their joy kind of rub off on us. I know that it's important for me a lot of times when I get stuck in cycles of self-criticism or frustration or fear. These people help bring the joy of the Lord into my life. Do you know that nearly every research agency that I could find has been studying and paying close attention to happiness levels throughout the pandemic? That includes USA Today, Pew Research, the National Library of Medicine, and Harvard. And all these people that have been studying it have found that there's only one group of people who has emerged from the pandemic just as happy or happier than before. And it is those people who have prioritized weekly worship services throughout it. Something about spending time in the presence of God cultivates our joy. If Jesus or God is really like the being we talked about in the very beginning, how much truer might that be of spending time with him, taking a few minutes every day to focus our attention on him? What could that do to our hearts and our minds and our joy and our happiness? There's this budding field of research called neurotheology, and they like to study people's brains through MRI and long-term studies. They pay attention closely to what people are experiencing when they're having religious experiences, what's going on in their bodies physically. And they found that when you focus your attention on God for an extended period of time, it actually lights up your entire brain, all connecting it together. It interconnects every part, and it has a profound impact on how you think, on your memory, on your overall brain functioning. It's almost like we were designed to set our attention on every bit of him from time to time. Psalm 1 says, this is what happens to those who meditate on God. They're like trees planted along a riverbank, bearing fruit each season. Their leaves never wither, and they prosper in all that they do. Can you imagine this tree? sitting there by a river with the roots kind of pouring into the stream. This mineral-rich water is flowing through and nourishing the tree. And no matter what happens through all of the different seasons and with everything else that's going on in the forest, this tree grows stronger and stronger, and it cultivates all kinds of beautiful leaves and vibrant fruit throughout all of the years, no matter what's happening around it. That's the image of a person who soaks themselves in the presence of our joyful God. And the invitation of Psalm 1 and the entire book is to take the songs that are inside of it and allow them to work on our emotions, to help us grow in gratitude and perspective and understanding, and to point us towards joy. And so the challenge this week is to spend some time meditating, fixating our attention on this psalm or another psalm, and let his infectious joy fill your life. Now, don't get me wrong. Jesus was certainly saturated in joy, but he was also described as a man well acquainted with sorrows. He was rejected by the very people he came to love and to help. He was ridiculed, he was tortured, he was assassinated. Growing your happiness does not mean we'll never be sad or overwhelmed or angry or afraid. See, emotional maturity, as we learn about it through Jesus, is able to fully experience both joy and sorrow, sometimes even at the same time. That's also what we see in the book of Psalms itself. There's basically two categories of Psalms. There's praise and lament. And as you read through the book, you'll find stretches of each. Sometimes you'll even find some Psalms that are a mixture of both. They're almost like in a wrestling match throughout the book. These two ideas are intermingled in tension, reflecting that the human experience is both full of pleasure and joy, but also ravaged by pain. But as you approach the end of the book, through a long journey of 143 Psalms or so, one of them begins to win out. And finally, the book of Psalm culminates with 5 final Psalms that are just purely reveling in the goodness that only comes from God. It might feel like evil is winning a lot of the time, but the Psalms want to remind you that sorrow and suffering is temporary while happiness is eternal. If God is the God of all joy and he's forever, and if sorrow comes from sin, which has an expiration date, then our experience and moments of joy are more real and more lasting than any experience of sadness, anger, or insecurity. Suffering, pain, and chaos in this planet, they have a gravitational pull that pulls us towards cynicism and pessimism. It's like a current. But God is calling us to follow him by swimming upstream, to boldly cultivate happiness when it would be easier to grow in sorrow, to plan, to celebrate even when things aren't going our way, to be obedient even when we have to delay our gratification, to spend time in his presence even when we're busy. What if he wants you to know that your greatest weapon against suffering on this planet is your happiness? Joy just might be our greatest protest against evil. A few years ago, I read a story from a pastor. His name's Delonte Golston. And a young man he knew who was about 15 years old, his name's Darius Smith. He was killed by an off-duty customs agent. And it was just this awful, terrible tragedy in their lives and in their community. And so Delonte found himself at the funeral, and he was sitting there just kind of letting the moment seep in. And he felt this sense of meaninglessness and depression, and it was just kind of becoming who he was, and he was finding himself in kind of a dark place. But as the funeral went on, something unexpected happened. As they arrived at the gravesite, somebody turned up the volume on their car radio to one of Darius's favorite songs. And every single person there, starting with Darius's own mother, began to dance and experience in this moment of pain a great, exhilarating moment of joy. And so Delonte, he finishes the story by saying, nurtured by centuries of spiritual practices, this was a bold and prophetic act of resistance and defiance of a demonic force that seeks to kill you and to snuff out your joy. He said, this is the kind of joy that no evil power can extinguish. This is the joy of resistance. This is the joy of the Lord that gives us strength. Right now, we have a chance to protest. We have a chance to laugh in the face of evil, to cultivate our joy by continuing to fixate our attention on God. Over these next few minutes, There's going to be words on the screen and beautiful music to hear, music that comes straight out of the legacy of the Psalms, in which we get to fixate our attention on good, beautiful truths, things that will cultivate in our hearts a sense of joy and reality about the eternality of God, the one who created it all and who brings happiness onto this planet. Augustine, the ancient church father, he once said that the world is a smiling place, and God is its lavisher of gifts. And these songs remind us of that truth, that we have to kick against the cynicism and pessimism and negativity that is on an onslaught of us all the time, and instead swim upstream and protest. And so I challenge you over these next few minutes to really engage it, really sing. I know it can be awkward and weird, but to let your voices and your bodies and your whole selves join in, bringing your entire attention on God and the reality of who he is and the joy that he wants to cultivate in your heart and in your mind. And then as you do that, we have these tables set up throughout the room. There's some boxes where you can give joyfully. You can remember that everything you have is a good gift from God, and just give a little bit back to him and to the mission that he's doing through this church by giving in those boxes or giving online. And you can also take a little bit of bread and a little bit of juice. These little symbols, these microscopic versions of something that's waiting for us in eternity. These tables are meant to remind you that there's a meal waiting for you. Remember, what did Jesus give us to remember him, to celebrate him? Carbs and wine. This is the good God that we get to follow and be in his presence. What would you expect from a God of all joy and all beauty and all goodness and all happiness? It would be a symbol that reminds us of the most happy, beautiful things we could ever experience. And so take these moments and fully embrace the joy that's being presented to you. Engage these songs and worship the God of all joy, happiness, love, and goodness. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for the revelation of who Jesus is. Thank you for his presence on this planet and for the lasting legacy he has through the church. We pray that we can cultivate in ourselves the joy that reflects him and his presence that was here. May we be the kinds of people that have an atmosphere about us that bring joy and love and hope and beauty, and that people are just magnetized, attracted to you through a community like this. God, this world is a dark and difficult place, and so we just pray in the midst of all of that pain and suffering, and whatever that looks like on an individual basis or on a collective basis, or the way in which our world is kind of twisting and turning, God, may we remember that the stability of your presence is true, that your joy will start now and it lasts through eternity, and may we get a small taste of that today, not just in our mind in an intellectual way, but actually in our feelings. May we recognize your presence through the joy that's being cultivated within us. We love you, God. And we give you these moments as we worship, as we remember, and as we are generous and loving and serving you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
rose up from that grave. My God still rolling stones away. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. We were the beggars, now we're royalty. We were the prisoners, now we're running free. We are forgiven, accepted, redeemed by His grace. Let the house of the Lord sing praise. Come on, sing that out loud. We were the beggars, now we're royalty. We were the prisoners, now we're running free. We are forgiven, accepted, redeemed by His grace. Let the house of the Lord sing praise. Come on, sing it out. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. Shout out your praise. I will sing of your goodness. I will sing of your love. Though the seasons come quickly, you have always been enough. Though the night may be darker, though the waiting seems long, you have always been faithful to remind me of your love. You are good. In the morning I'll sing that you are good. In the evening I'll sing that you are good. You are good to me. Yes. You have always been patient. You have always been kind. You're consistent through the ages. What a friend of mine. I will mind my soul to bless you, standing firm upon the truth. No, you cannot be shaken, so I've seen what you can do. You are good. In the morning I'll say that you are good. In the evening I'll say that you are good. You are good to me. Oh, you are good. In the morning I'll say that you
love you. Go in God's joy. Go in His grace. We love you. We'll see you next week.